welcome to another episode of God-Sized Stories. I have Amy back again, and this episode is going to be a little bit different. Coming really soon is a wonderful holiday of Mother's Day, and we love talking about mothers and how they've impacted our lives, and we love celebrating mothers. Amy and I, we both work at the preschool, so we get to interact with a lot of mothers, and we see the impact that they have on children's lives. But specifically today, we're going to talk a little bit more about celebrating my mom and the impact she's had on me and how she's really affected my outlook on life.
When you invited me to be part of your podcast a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about our lives and motherhood and kids, that led into a conversation a little bit about your mom, which really impacted me. And so I'm so excited to talk a little bit more about your mom.
Yeah.
So tell us about your mom, Craig.
Yeah. So my mom was an extremely powerful woman, obviously had tremendous impact on me and my life and how I treat people. And just, I wouldn't be the man I am if I didn't have a mom that loved me like she did. And she was a complicated person, as all humans are. We live in a complicated world, and so nothing is simple. But my mom had so many beautiful strengths and gifts and talents, and some of them can be attributed to her childhood and her upbringing. And she didn't have a simple one. She didn't have an easy one. She had a lot of bad stereotype upbringing things, and you can see how it impacted her. She lived a rough childhood. She spent a season of her life in the foster care system and didn't have an ideal situation with that. So it really taught her to guard herself, maybe a little bit too much, maybe not open up to people as much as she could have, but it taught her how to be strong, how to persevere through literally anything. She had been through the darkest things that humans can go through, and she came out on the other side stronger for it. And she wanted to protect everyone around her, especially the most vulnerable, because she didn't feel protected as a child. So that was a thing that she taught me very early on, is to protect people, no matter who they are, no matter whether you agree with them or disagree with them. One of the stories I love telling about my mother is how powerful, not just emotionally, not just all the ways that she was, but as well physically. My mom was not a physically intimidating woman. She stood to about my shoulder height, which I'm only 5'11", so that means she was not very tall. She definitely was not above 5 foot even. And she always loved to say the only time in her life she weighed over 100 pounds was when she was pregnant with me. So she was not the biggest dog in the fight. She was a little woman. But I love to joke that she's a descendant of ants, because the things that I personally had seen her do, in a story related to both those things, of how powerful she was and defending she was, her and one of my sisters would both agree to this, that they didn't always get along. They were definitely, as children can be with parents and parents can be with children, at odds very often. But my mom would always defend her children, whether she agreed with them or not. And there was a time my sister got in trouble. We would have been in middle school, I believe, at the time. She would have at least been in middle school. I would have been a year or two younger, 2 years younger than her. And she got in trouble, and we had to stay after school and wait for Mom to pick us up, because she needed to talk to the principal, and she needed to talk to the school nurse about an incident that had happened. And the nurse didn't say very nice things about my sister and about my sister's attitude, and used not so great language to speak of her. My mom turned on the rage, the Hulk Hogan mode. And this lady was not, this school nurse was not a small woman by any means. She was, think of like a stereotype of what your school nurse would look like, is what this lady looked like. Any kid show or cartoon, that's what this lady looked like. My mom walked up to her, grabbed her by the shirt collar, lifted her off the ground.
What?
And said, "Don't you ever talk about my daughter." And put her back down, and I'm just sitting there on the bench. I'm sitting on the bench, just mouth wide open, like, oh no, like, this woman terrified. Like, I was like respectfully terrified. It's like one of those like power of God things that you see, and you're just like, only can sit in awe of great power. And so it's like, and she did. It's like the stories you hear of like a person picking up a bus,
like superhuman.
Exactly,
superhuman power.
That was what my mom was capable of doing to defend the people that needed defending.
Wow.
And like I saw those things as a child, and those things carried over to me, and it's like that's why I do things like care for children. That's why I love doing preschools, because my mom taught me we need to protect these. They need us more than anyone, because they're children, and like God says the same things too. Like my mom was not a spiritual woman, but God implants truths in everyone, even people that aren't believers. There's still, God plants truth there, and that was the thing she was about, was protecting children, protecting people that need help. As an example as well, my sisters being a part of our family, she adopted my sisters. Her and my father adopted my sisters because she saw a need. She knew of two little girls that needed a family, and she wanted to protect them, and so she brought them into the family for that. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's a beautiful heart, and it's once again a biblical thing that was implanted in her that she wouldn't have recognized as that. And I still look back at with joy. Another story of my mom's power, and why I would never mess with my mother. I would have fought my father 1,000 times before I would have ever considered fighting my mother once.
Does he know that?
Oh, yes. He would agree with that statement.
Oh, he would agree.
He would agree. He would want to fight me before fighting her. He knew he would stand no chance. My mother, along with her rough childhood upbringing, got married at a very young age to get out of a system that was harmful for her, but married into a relationship that was also harmful for her. And her first husband was a former bodybuilder, just bear of a man.
Much larger than her.
Sure. And after he was retired from that lifestyle, the rest of it caught back up to him. So like obviously then he's angry and he's upset because he's not Mr. Muscles anymore, and he's lost his physique. And he coped with that with drinking. And was just really cruel towards everyone around him, and would hurt my mother. You know, obviously she wasn't my mother yet because I wasn't in existence. And would hurt her a lot. And then until one day when he came home and just messed up as usual and threatened her with a gun.
Wow.
My mom beat him so badly with the kitchen table, he ended up in the ER. Well, not with the kitchen table, with the kitchen chair from the table. Just hit him so bad that, and it's like, and this was a story I heard as a young child, and I always thought as a kid, it's like, all right, Ma's just trying to to intimidate me, trying to push the right buttons to make me be like, don't mess with Mom.
Right.
But then I started seeing things like that school nurse story. And then I'm like, maybe there's truth to these. But then one of those glorious God things, as years went on, that man actually, my mom's first husband, turned his life around, cleaned up, became a really great man. And my family actually became friends with him again. I remember being in middle school and then actually going to this guy's house and sharing a meal with them because his life was different. He was a different person now. And my mom, it took her a while to forgive people for things sometimes, but was willing to forgive just about anyone that was willing to seek her forgiveness, which, wow. Right. I would have a hard time forgiving a person that would be that cruel to me.
Right.
And so I finally asked this guy this question once. I was like, Ma always told me this story as a kid about, you know, what you used to do to her. and then this time with a gun, and her putting you in the hospital, and he's like, oh, that doesn't compare to the stories of how terrible it was. It's like how bad I used to be to her. Wow. And that incident, he said he was in the hospital for a month.
Oh my.
He barely survived.
Wow.
Because she was so willing to defend herself in that moment. And like that taught me great pride of then how to, handle myself. And like, I really need to be, it's like maybe not that defensive at times, but it was a great thing that taught me so much. And there was other things, obviously, I learned from her through that as well. Like things that were good and bad, things that carried with me even to an adulthood now. And I struggled with coming to faith of the idea of taking care of yourself. My mom learned how to take care of herself, and there's a lot of things that she taught us that we need to do things ourselves. We can't always rely on other people.
Sure.
She would have argued you should never rely on other people.
Out of necessity for herself growing up,
Exactly,
I'm sure.
Exactly. That's just the defensive mechanism. You should never rely on anybody. It's up to you.
Right.
There's there's truth to that. You should work hard. It built a good work ethic in me to work hard, to take pride in the things. There's the other side of that, as we've been talking even now before this, is like scripturally, like there are things we can't do for ourselves. Right. Obviously, we can't save ourselves. We can't make ourselves holy. We need to give that to Christ because we can't do that. But there's still great things in Scripture about work ethic and working hard and stuff like that. And my mother made me the man that I am, who is willing to work hard when is needed, who is willing to, I don't have time, but I'm going to do this for you because I might not need it, but you do. My mom was a very selfless person. She sacrificed a lot for herself for the people around her. Example as well was a big thing for my mom was going to the dentist. She didn't have it as a kid, and she had terrible teeth.
Oh, sure.
But us as kids, there was not a dentist appointment we could miss.
Oh,
even to the point of, I was jealous of everybody, because everybody went to the dentist during the day. And it's like, they're going out of school.
They got
going to the dentist. They get to miss school. No. You don't miss school.
You do it after school.
You go after school. I'm going to pick you right up at the end of the day. If you have special activities after school, special activities don't matter. You're going to the dentist right now. And like that, but once again, that was a thing that built in good habits for me, taking care of myself, taking care of my teeth, and then just doing stuff that is important and being, well, no, I was going to say being on time, but my parents were not good at that.
Not on time?
They were
not
very
prompt people?
They were very free spirit of go with the flow, which was nice.
So your mom could also be very go with the flow. She could also be very...
Yeah, there was the joke growing up. We never went on vacation, usually. Partially because we spent money on the family doing stuff for fun. We'd be like, hey, this weekend, we're going to go a weekend trip.
Nice.
We're going to go with the flow, which I think has helped me a lot in some ways. I can be, as you've seen in preschool setting, I can be very flexible at times.
Yes, you can be.
It's from doing stuff like that. It's like, oh, we're just going to pick up and we're going to go. And it's like, whoa, okay, let's do that.
Wow.
And it's so, I was always closer. I'm very close to my father, but I'm a mama's boy. I was always much closer to her. Some of it was time stuff because my mom worked like early morning shift when she worked in a factory for a long time. And she was there off. We didn't ride the bus often for a long time because she was just there to pick us up. And I have many great memories of going home right after school. There's a very great memory of my mom many times just going to McDonald's and she would get a single cheeseburger. Like, I'm not talking like, you get like on the cheap menu like the McDouble or something. No, it's literally like a single tiny patty and a single little piece of cheese. That woman would eat that, and she would be fueled on that for like 10 hours.
But she was so little.
Exactly.
She did not need that much.
Exactly. And it's just like, I have so many sweet memories of that, and then like sitting and eating one of those, watching Judge Judy on the couch.
She probably loved Judge Judy, actually.
She loved
She could identify with her.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man.
Small but mighty.
Uh-huh. My mom, she, like, where she was good in defending us, there was times that it was great to be defended, but there's probably times I shouldn't have been defended. Because, like, within these things, like it built good habits, but it also built bad, because we're broken humans. It's what we do. And there's times that I wasn't the best child. I was a good child,
mm-hmm.
but I was as most children can be, naughty at times. And there was
naughty.
We were, the class especially that I was part of, we were especially naughty, and we had teachers complain about us often as a class, but my mom would always defend us, and it was always so sweet, like maybe in a bad way looking back, like that I knew she would defend us for doing something not wise sometimes. Like I remember having an outdoor sports day and she was there as a chaperone, and I was supposed to be doing like a softball toss, see how far you can throw it, and I'm being a middle schooler thinking he's smart, and I just throw the ball straight up in the air. I'm like, that's far, isn't it? And just making the gym teacher so mad. But the gym teacher also seeing my mom stand like 20 yards away and knowing the reputation of my mother.
He didn't say anything, let me guess.
No, not at all.
Craig, your mom sounds like an amazing woman, coming from what she came from and how she raised you and defended you to the end of all of your naughtiness. I know that your mom isn't with us anymore. Tell us a little bit about what happened and that time of your life.
Yeah, so that I always start this part of my life by saying this was definitely one of the darkest moments for me spiritually, because my mother meant so much to me as a person. I did struggle with her a little bit back and forth with our faith stuff, because she didn't grow up with that, and faith was actually, because of her childhood, a little bit of a rough spot with having some hard things happen to her from the church community that she didn't sit well with. But she was always happy for me that I had faith. But losing her was a big, dark cloud in that season for me. It was about 6 or 7 years ago now. She was diagnosed with cancer, a couple different kinds, and it was quick. It wasn't one of those diagnoses where they're like, well, we'll see how it goes. It went pretty fast, and it affected her brain pretty quick, which destroyed a lot of her gross motor functions.
Wow, that's hard.
I have a great joy of one of the last great days with her, before all of her health issues, to my knowledge, had started, was we went to a bird exhibit, whatever you would call.
Bird sanctuary?
Yeah, bird sanctuary. A thing like that. It was her birthday, and this is the thing. My mom loved birds.
Oh, wow.
For whatever reason. She had 2 birds, 2 cockatiels, which I'm glad people love birds, but I don't want to. I love looking at birds and being outside with birds, but I don't want a bird in my house. They're loud. They're sweet, but they're loud. But my mom loved birds and had countless bird feeders and bird houses all over the yard, and just was excited to go to this sanctuary. So we went with her. My wife Alicia does not share the same love of birds, even as I do. Like, I love seeing birds outside. She's not for the birds. The birds, some people are that way, and I think it's less that she's not for the birds, and it's more the birds are not for her.
That happens.
There's been times her and I've been on walks, and one have swooped down and bumped into her, and she just like freaks out because it's like, a bird just ran into me. This is fair. She should freak out in that situation. But we went to this bird sanctuary with her, and she was so happy. And I can still picture her smile. But I did notice as well that she was walking really slow, slower than usual. She wasn't a fast woman. She was a small woman, as we discussed.
Right.
So she wasn't running around in the first place, but was a little more gingerly than usual. And then about a week later, a lot started happening with her health. She ended up going in and out of the hospital a lot, which scared me because I didn't know how to process this, and my parents were not very open often with health concerns, as many people of their generation have done with people of my generation. It's been a thing that I've encouraged many people over the last half decade to be open, be honest with your kids, even young kids. Obviously there's things you shouldn't share with your children, but there's things that we need to share more with our children about how we're doing, even emotionally, with things to help them be more rounded adults. And so I was scared. I was terrified because this is my mother. This is one of the people that has had the biggest impact. And she's, as I was referencing so much before, she's strong. Nothing can take out this woman. Right. Like, she's indestructible. And now she's stuck. She's in a bed. She can't do... This is a woman that's done everything for herself. And now everything has to be done for her.
Oh, wow. That had been really hard to see. And
it's just like, I've never cried more than just all the things leading up to this and then after it, because this is... It didn't make sense. My brain didn't work with this idea of power just being broken down in such a way.
Right.
And it went on like that for a couple months, in and out of the hospital and stuff. And then she got put on hospice and was at home. And the treatments that they were trying weren't doing really anything. And they were just making her feel worse and be less responsive, which she didn't want.
Right.
Like, if she couldn't be awake and talk to people, she'd rather not do some of those things. So she spent a season on hospice at home. And I spent a lot of time traveling back and forth. It's about an hour and a half from where we live now, and it's like anytime I could take off to go, I was there, because she needed help, obviously, and my dad was there, but my dad is falling apart at the same time, because this woman was his world at the time. Like, he cared about her deeply, obviously. And then luckily her sister was there as well, helping my dad, living there for a season, taking care of whatever she could, because my mom, for caring for things that can't care for themselves, loved animals, obviously. So they had 3 dogs, 3 cats, a bird at the time. So it's like my dad tried to take care of her and all of that and work all at the same time. It wasn't working. So just spending a lot of great time with them, hearing stories about my mom's childhood from her and her sister that I cherish, because these were things that I'd not gotten. Hearing some really hard things. Learning even more so how strong my mother was.
Thinking about her history.
Yeah, and it was just beautiful things and great time to connect. But then, obviously, with the vast majority of people on hospice, the reason they're on hospice is it is the end.
Right.
And that time came, and it was really hard for me, because I don't think anybody can be ready for that.
Right.
You know, that journey of losing someone so important to them. But it hit me hard. And I remember, I can look back at this now and laugh, but I'm often irrational about a lot of things. I have...
I'll have to remember that about
my mom had a fiery passion of all things she did, and sometimes that can make someone irrational, and I am that. I'm my mother's son. And so I remember, in the moment of finding out my mom passed, the thing that upset me the most was I was working at ELV at the time, as we've been talking in the past about this, and the Christmas pageant was about to happen. And for anybody that's never worked with kids and never worked on putting a Christmas pageant type thing together, the amount of work, the amount of stress, the amount of effort that gets put into getting these kids to memorize songs and stand in front of people, and it was going to be so good. And I was going to miss it because of this. And I was so irrationally upset about that, because I didn't want to process losing my mom. I just remember being so upset about that and being so unreasonably upset about that instead of allowing myself to process. And it's funny to look back now that I have processed.
Right.
But then going through that and then going to the funeral and having people around me, and this is one of the biggest things I've learned from the whole situation, is having support and having people around you, especially in faith now, and having people of faith, having brothers and sisters in Christ that can be there to support you, because we are one of the few things we're promised from God is that hard things are going to happen in this life. In this fallen world, things like this are going to happen. And He's provided us the saints, the brothers and the sisters. And we had only lived in this area at that point for 4 or 5 months.
So did you have a support at that time?
I had zero. I had support, obviously, because with this day and age, with technology and stuff, obviously you always have some level of support. Like, I had tons of great friends and family, but most of them were an hour and a half away.
Mm-hmm.
We'd only been going to church in our local church since I had started the job 3 or 4 months beforehand,
sure.
working at the preschool. So it's like we weren't connected to any sort of small group. I hadn't built any real friends yet. They're just acquaintances that were starting to become friendly.
So you felt a little isolated?
So I felt extremely isolated. I had nobody. So it's like the funeral was amazing. I had people come from miles and miles away. Like, there was at least 24 people that came for me that didn't even know my mother, or they knew her very minorly through me, but they were there for me. And it was a blizzard, and I couldn't believe that. And a lot of them drove over an hour to get there, and I couldn't believe that they were there for me, and I felt so loved and taken care of. But then it was return to life, and I was working part-time at the time, 3 days a week, and that leaves a lot of time of just sitting alone, kind of not purposefully not processing what had happened, because I wasn't talking to people about it. It created a really dark part in my walk, because I was so mad. I was so upset with God, with myself, with family members. It's just like, how could this happen? And really struggling with people say things with love intent in their heart,
right?
Like, all things for God's glory and stuff like that. There's a time and there's a place to share those things. Someone that's just lost,
right,
might not need to hear that in the moment, because that's not where your brain always goes. And my brain was not. My brain was going, because I don't know if my mother was saved. I know I had shared the gospel with her. I know people close to her had shared the gospel with her. But I don't know where her heart was. Only God knows where her heart was. And I had to be okay with not knowing that.
Right.
And it took me a long time, because I struggled with the idea, God is good, God is great, but why would he take away this woman that there was still more for her? Like,
she was young, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was only in her late 50s, early 60s. I didn't, there was so much for her to do in her life, so much more that I wanted to share with her. I know people other in her life that were believing that wanted to share more with her.
Right.
And it's like, I struggled with that idea of like, why would God take this woman?
Yeah, sure.
In my mind, in my selfish mind, she wasn't ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, foolish, simple human me. Now I can look back. Now I can see some of those scriptures where it's like, yes, I know God will. I'm okay with that. I might not be happy about it still, but I'm okay with agreeing with scripture to say, all things will. All things will. I need to have faith in that. But I didn't have people at that time I heard a great sermon years after that about Job and his friends.
Right.
And at first, Job's friends were amazing.
Yes.
Because they showed up.
Yes.
And they shut up. They just sat with him. They wept with him. They tore garments with, they did what was called of them, and then they opened their mouth. And then things went downhill from there. And I didn't have that in that season. Partially on my own. I can't, blame the universe and everybody around me for not supporting me.
You had just moved.
Yeah, and it's like, that's why I always encourage people, especially when I have friends that move to a new place. I'm like, find your local church, find your body, get connected, because you never know when tragedy is going to happen and when you're going to need support. It might not even be a death. It might be your car broke down and you need help and you don't know anybody.
Right.
Like, you need, God made us to be
in community with other
community.
People. Yes.
So I really, if you're listening and you don't have community of some kind, please find community. It is the most important thing for me in my life, is people and community. But at the same time, I know God's made me an extrovert. I need people for more than tragedy. I need people for always, all the
You
time.
need people for living.
Exactly. I know you introverts out there grumbling at me saying that.
They don't need anybody.
Exactly. But I struggled for a long time, and I eventually, years later, for different reasons as well, went to therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the clinical licensed counselor,
Uh-huh.
and worked out some of those things
Sure.
then, which was great. And that's another thing I always support all people. Get some therapy. It'll radically change.
Everybody can benefit from therapy.
Everybody can.
I agree.
But it was hard. And then going forward from that,
Mm-hmm.
seeing my family and seeing how it affected my family, and that's the hard part. That's the area that I still struggle with it today. When I see the things and think of like my nieces and nephews and her not getting to see some of those things. And my sister got married,
Yeah.
and she missed that, and like got married to a great guy
Mm-hmm.
that she would have loved this guy.
Oh.
Because my mom spent most of her life in not like cities, but more like your Rockford type, which is a small city. She spent most of her life in areas like that, but that girl was a country girl at heart. And that's why where we grew up is where we grew up, because she wanted to get away from that stuff. She
Sure.
loved the open air. Yeah. We spent so much time just out on boats on the Mississippi River because, and my dad's the same way. They're just country people and they love it. And my sister married a guy that is that he's a country boy, and it's great. And she would have been so happy for my sister who struggled with being happy for so long and being connected, kind of same stuff. And my mom would have been. And like, she loved her grandchildren. Oh my gosh. And like, the thing that I still, when I think about her, that makes me cry today is that someday, Lord willing, I will have kids. And they will only get to hear the stories of this wonderful, powerful woman.
Yes.
And not get to be held by her and hear these stories from her.
And experience that.
Yes. Experience hamburgers
yes.
and Judge Judy with her.
Yes.
They'll only get to be made fun of by my father instead. Gentle ribbings of my father. And like there's still a fair amount of time when I think about my future and having kids that because it's sad. And it's a thing they won't be lacking. They'll be surrounded by people that love them. I know this. Because the things my parents taught me about having good people in your life. Like, yes, my mom didn't rely on other people, but she loved people. She loved surrounding herself with people, having people over for dinner and things. They loved it. So they've taught me that. And so my kids won't lack, but they will lack in some ways.
Sure, and not meeting her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And really kind of the other thing that I really want people to get from this, because this is important, and the whole thing that's spurring this is our conversation before, and the fact that Mother's Day is nigh, and our parents should be so valuable to us, and not just our parents, our whole family and our whole community, obviously. But this whole situation was such a fast thing for me. I couldn't process it in the moment, especially because it was so fast. But coming out of the other side of it, what it did for me was realizing how important my family was. I cared about them before. Obviously, I love them dearly. They're my family. They're the only family you get is the family you get. You can make your own family, but blood is blood. Yeah. And I had a stronger zeal for the rest of my family since my mom passed, and how quickly it was, because I started to realize some of those things of, you don't know. Life can end in an instant. We see that every day. And I really, since then, have encouraged people, care for your family in a way that is so Christ-centered, that is so beautiful, that they can't deny the fruit of the Spirit in you by how much you love them. So I've taken a bigger care. I at least have tried to. Obviously, I'm broken. I'm a human. I'm going to do my best. Growing up, I might not have always been the best brother. And I've had great conversations with my sisters since childhood, and I need to continue to have more, obviously. I can always be a better brother to them. But I, especially like with my nieces and nephews, I want to love them, 'cause especially the way that my mom would have loved them. Like, I don't want them to miss out on that love, and I can provide them that kind of love.
Yeah, death does have a way of bringing so many things into focus in a way that other things don't have the ability to do.
And I try my best to stay as connected with my father as possible, because my father's an interesting man. There's times I think he's an introvert. There's times I think he's an extrovert. I can't tell. That man is a mystery, a great mystery, in fact. But I know he loves hearing from me. And so I do my best to call him as much as possible, or see him, go out and see him as much as I can, and help him with the things I can, because the man still has 3 dogs, 3 cats, and a house with a yard that he can't take care of by himself.
And the bird?
And the bird has left us since then, tweet. Yes. But he needs help, and I love to help him, and it brings him joy to just go see him and do yard work with him and get dinner with him. It's just being there, because that's the power of being there is more than saying stuff sometimes.
Well, and I think, that's part of the legacy that your mom leaves behind. That she taught you to be family-centered and help people, and I think that just speaks volumes to your mom and how she raised you.
So yeah, everyone out there, please just find time to love your family more. We always can. I know I can as well. Whether there's tragedy or not happening in your family, somebody probably needs you for something.
Well said. Somebody needs you for something.
Yeah, even if it's someone, if they're like me, and they just need to talk to someone because they're an extrovert and they just need to get that.
Yes. Somebody needs to be listened to out there.
Yes. Oh, yes. We exist. Well, Amy, thank you so much for helping me create this unique episode. Well, first of all, for having the idea for this unique episode. It's brought me joy to just talk more about my mom. Yeah,
thank you for sharing more about your mom. It's been interesting as we've spoken about your mom over the past couple of weeks. It helps me to have a bigger sense and a better sense of who you are, and kind of where you come from too. So it's been actually great getting to know you through the stories about your mom.
Well, once again, Amy, thank you so much. And audience, thank you so much as always for listening. I couldn't do this without you.